for the Weekly Planet podcast show. So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest have undertaken an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and film festivals and directors and all this other stuff that I really know nothing about because they made this really long list of things that they want to talk about and I can't even read through all of them, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Planet podcast, your daily dose of all things movies, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly, editor-in-chief of dailyplanetfilms.com, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and co-editor, Matt Freeman. Matt, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about Man of Steel, the latest and greatest Superman film.
Oh, greatest. I don't know about that.
So me and Scott are going to be at odds this time because Scott, I get the impression somehow that he doesn't like this movie, and I can defend this movie, and I actually like where it's coming from, and we also have somebody else on the podcast today who agrees with me. So
I'm outnumbered. Who is that? Who's on?
Well, this is my brother once again, Daniel Freeman. Daniel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I am excited to defend one of my favorite movies.
Wait. One of your favorite movies?
Well, see, I can find something redeeming about pretty much any movie. So
okay,
all movies are really my favorite movie in some sense.
That's fair. I'm going to enjoy this even more now because Man of Steel is a terrible movie. We are going to get into that, but before we did that, I just wanted to go over some quick news items. The first thing I want to talk about here is the new trailer for Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, the worst title in the history of forever. That the trailer dropped, I think mid last week for that. I think it was right before right after we recorded, so we couldn't talk about it last week. But this trailer is terrible, I think. What do you guys think about it?
So I thought it was pretty awful because, like most of the internet, seems to agree with me about how it kind of gives away the entire plot of the movie. I wish they had gone the I guess is it J.J. Abrams' route of just like that first shot of like Superman smashing down into like the underground dungeon thing and then just coming up and scowling like that, how they did that for the teaser. I wish that had been everything that there was, because that's so much more effective in like generating hype and doesn't tell me anything, and I'm so disappointed.
I mean, do they actually have like professional people whose job it is to determine what these trailers should be? Because I mean, it's possible that we're entirely wrong, because I think all of us agree that this was a bad trailer, and I don't think any of us are necessarily saying anything about the movie when we say that. We're saying that it's a badly made advertisement for this movie because it gives everything away.
Yeah, it's very badly cut, and it's not just. I think it's not just that it gives a lot away. It's just really poorly paced. Mm-hmm. It's very strange.
So I've read a little bit more about this because this happens all the time, and I'm constantly bewildered about how trailers are horrible. And they actually do pretty extensive like focus group / A/B testing of trailers. And I think we're just in like a little like bubble world of like, I don't know, ivory tower cinema watching, where most people actually want to know what the plot of the movie is before seeing it, which I find just strange.
And plus we already know a lot about this particular set of I mean, I guess, you know, a rough analogy would be like if there was just some movie you'd never heard of and you were sitting in like a focus group room and they showed you like pictures of actors' faces having emotions with music and then, you know, a title card, you would just be like, okay, I don't know what that is. I'm not going to remember this at all. But because you've never heard of it, you kind of need to actually have your hand held and have it summarized to you. So
yeah, and I would buy that argument for anything other than Batman versus Superman, because they're like the two most recognizable characters in American like film canon in history. So
yeah, that's a good point, because they actually spend part of the trailer having the car drive up with Bruce Wayne and having someone be, well, that's Bruce Wayne. and then it's like, and then the guy who's obviously Clark Kent going, "I'm Clark Kent," and it's like, you don't need to. Everyone knows who Clark Kent is.
So I think we're all in agreement that the trailer's bad. I think the movie looks bad too. I cannot wait to see it because it looks hilariously silly. But like, I mean, Jesse Eisenberg's Luther portrayal looks awful to me. He's just doing silly like Gene Hackman Luther again. I thought they were going to go somewhere different with it, but that's not where it's going. Affleck looks okay as Batman, but the voice, like the Batman voice, I don't know what they're doing. Like it's all like
I mean it's
computer enhanced. Yeah, it's weird.
See, I like this more than with just like a human trying to do that, because like the canonically only good Batman voice was the animated series voice when it's just a man talking like this, and it's not ridiculous.
Can we just not? Can we just not do that anymore? Like, is that just not acceptable?
I don't know. I don't understand. But I mean, I guess they've decided that the solution is that Batman has decided that he's going to mask his voice digitally, which is actually somewhat logical if you're trying to hide your identity. Well,
and at first I thought that was just his voice when he's in that weird Superman fighting machine suit. And I thought that's just a result of being in that thing. But when he talked with his mask, like just his normal mask on, it was the same voice. So yeah, it just appears to be what they're going with.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I think, to be as charitable as possible, they're probably just trying to set themselves as far apart from Nolan's Batman as possible, and doing these little sorts of stylistic differences like help do that. I don't know.
Well, and it's weird in that way because I do think stylistically it's very different from Nolan's films because it looks ridiculously silly. There was random flying demons that you saw in demon-looking things in some section. Doomsday himself looks absurd. It's definitely moving in a very different direction from the Nolan films, but it's also keeping that dark, like depressing overture.
It definitely has grit still, which is
bad.
I will agree that it's a very strange tone that they're going for, which is actually pretty distinct from Man of Steel, at least from what the trailer is showing. But
yeah, well, and you can't even be sure what tone they're going for yet, because this movie at least seems like it might have some jokes in it,
right?
Whereas I don't think Man of Steel really did.
No.
So
I can confirm after watching it 2 hours ago.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe this is going to be a slightly different movie with a bit more self-consciously silly tone, in which case I think it'll be better. But I don't know. We'll see.
I just think it's very interesting. Going back to talking about spoilers, I mean, I think, Matt, I showed you that other cut of the trailer that took out the basic Doomsday reveal, because I think the dumbest thing they've done here is they spent a year hyping up this epic battle between Batman and Superman, and then in the trailer reveal that that's going to end basically in a tie, and they're just going to be buddies after that, which we all knew that, but like don't telegraph that in your first trailer.
Well, it's like that breaks every rule of how you set up these type of like, I believe the Japanese call it shonen style stories, where it's like if you have a progression of villains, you wait till the last minute to show like the high level villains. This is how pretty much all video games and stuff like that are structured. So by showing the high level, by showing the end boss in the trailer, you have ruined all the suspense for the audience that actually would care about that.
Yeah. And the trailer also reveals the pointless aspect of having them fight in the first place. When you have Superman say, "If I wanted you dead, I'd have done it already." Yeah. And it's like, well then, okay, your entire fight is pointless at this point.
Right. I mean, at least before you see that, you have this idea that Batman's like going to trick him, because that's the thing. Not that I've ever read any sort of Batman versus Superman story, but the whole point of Batman is that he's like very thoughtful and clever and meticulous. And if he was going to go up against Superman, then he would just like shoot Clark Kent with a kryptonite dart during the middle of the day when he's not expecting it. It wouldn't be a slugging match between a robotic suit and an invulnerable Superman. So
yeah, I wonder how they're going to deal with their secret identity thing, because I mean, obviously Superman could just X-ray vision and see exactly who Batman is, so that's not a thing. I know in the comics they had this cool thing, or not the comics, I think it was the animated series when they did a crossover between the two. They had a thing where like Batman like stuck a tracker on Superman's cape and then just waited for him to fly home and just saw him change.
Yeah.
And that's like a perfect Batman thing to do.
Yeah. Very simple.
But I doubt this movie's going to do something that cool because it looks ridiculous. All that being said, I think it's going to be silly and over the top and fun. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll probably be more fun than. Wait, no, I'm not supposed to say anything bad about.
No, it will be more fun than Man of Steel because Man of Steel is not fun at all.
Well,
Yeah, let's save it. So the next big thing I wanted to talk about, there's a film critic that I really like named David Ehrlich. I think he writes for Rolling Stone. But every year he compiles this video countdown of the his top 25 movies of the year. I don't know if you guys saw it. I linked it on my Facebook today. It's one of like the most well cut compilations I've ever seen. Like every year, it's always like super well done, and it's a very interesting list. It's always interesting to see just how few movies I've actually seen, even though I think I've seen a ton, because like half the movies on this list I haven't seen. But it's really cool. I think everyone should check it out. It's like 12 minutes long, but it's really great. Some of the song selections for some of the parts of the compilation are just perfect. Like Girls Just Want to Have Fun playing over Mad Max is just
that's fantastic.
Just the most perfect thing ever.
Yeah, I started watching that, but I couldn't devote my full attention to it, so I decided I would save it for later.
Well, you should. The last thing I wanted to briefly talk about, and then we'll move on to other stuff. I saw a movie this weekend called Chirac, which is Spike Lee's newest movie. I don't know if either of y'all have heard of that.
I read briefly about it like a week ago and then forgot everything that I read. So
yeah, it's based off of a Greek play by Aristophanes, I think. But where basically the concept was Greek women wanted their husbands to stop fighting, so they withheld sex from them until they agreed to peace. So it takes that idea and puts it into present day Chicago. I think the term Chirac was coined by a rapper because more people have died from gun violence in Chicago since 2001 than the Iraq and Afghanistan war combined. So it's this weird kind of like, since it's taken from that play, it's like told in rhyme and has like a rhythm to it, but it's like it like moves around in tone crazily. Like it's funny and silly in some points, but then like devastatingly sad in other moments, and like horribly pissed off. Like Spike Lee is pissed. Like Spike Lee's pissed about a lot. And he's not just turning his focus on like black on black crime. He's not just dealing with police violence or he's pissed about everything, and he shows it in this movie. But it's really good, surprisingly good. Nick Cannon is in it, and he's good, which was the biggest surprise to me. I didn't know that guy could actually act, but he can.
Nick
to look into this.
And Wesley Snipes is in it, and you can tell he's just having a really fun time.
Oh, cool.
He's just enjoying every scene he's in.
He's out of jail now?
I guess so.
I didn't know that.
But that was really good film, surprisingly good. I'm a big fan of Spike Lee. I think Do the Right Thing is one of the best movies ever made. So it's good to see him do something really good again, because he's always been good, but he hasn't been great in a while.
Yeah, that's Do the Right Thing. That's one of those older movies that I definitely need to watch for my education.
It is an older movie, but it's amazing how sadly relevant it is to our current situation. I would recommend that to everyone if you haven't seen it. Okay, Daniel, did you have anything you wanted to talk about before we move on?
Yes, so very topically, and perhaps not to anyone's surprise, I've been reading more web fiction lately, and I read Metropolis Man. There we go.
I thought it was Metropolitan Man.
Is it Metropolitan Man?
I don't know.
Metropolis Man. I don't actually remember.
I have Metropolitan Man written down. That's what you told me. So
it might actually be Metropolis Man. Now that I think about it, is it Metropolitan Man?
Yes.
Okay, it's Metropolitan Man, and it's a Superman fan fiction told from the perspective of mostly Lex Luthor, but also Lois Lane, and not really at all Superman's POV. It's just kind of entirely inside Lex Luthor and Lois Lane's heads. And it's actually really fantastic, and it kind of grapples with a lot of the themes I like wish and hope are explored in the new Superman reboot. And it's basically just a story about Lex Luthor realizing that Superman is just kind of a terrifying character, or like just a terrifying idea that there's this person that is invulnerable and could destroy everything, and the only reason he's not is because he just happens to be emotionally stable, and that the only thing preventing him from doing all of this, like completely destroying the planet, is basically nothing.
Yeah,
so he takes it upon himself to just kill Superman. Like he just has to. He realizes he must do this to save humanity.
And it does a lot of interesting things, digging into the fact that Superman's moral system is nonsensical and incoherent. Because like it basically it really makes Lex Luthor's position understandable, and you're sort of like, wow, yeah, that this would be a horrible existence, knowing that this guy was flying around and that he could just destroy a continent anytime he wanted, but he's choosing to use his power for stopping muggers because that's what amuses him. And what if that stops amusing him? And yeah.
And it's what's sort of interesting about this is that while it's like really super trope aware, never are any characters really dumb. Like all of the characters, no one ever carries the idiot ball, I guess is what I'm saying. And I appreciate it when there are stories with characters that don't carry the idiot ball, because then it's just more enjoyable and suspension of disbelief works better. But it's great. I strongly encourage anyone to read it.
Cool. I don't know if I would like that because I love Superman, and I don't know if I want to read something like I didn't want to watch something that paints Superman in this weird new kind of light, which I guess is a realistic light, but we'll get into that. That's a really good segue to our entire conversation this week. So the reason I decided that I wanted to talk about Superman and then roped you guys in to yell with for an hour is because there's a new show on CBS called Supergirl. It's really good. It's surprisingly good for a basic cable show. It's the type of show that's definitely meant for girls, and you can tell there's a lot of kind of girl power overtones in some of it. But that's all intentional, and but it portrays Superman, or Supergirl in this case, in one of the most accurate ways to how the character is actually supposed to be I've seen. It takes the time, like the first time that Supergirl saves anyone, she helps land a plane. Like every episode kind of starts with her doing something that, is not a big, huge saving people moment. Like I think one of the episodes, there's two guys fighting with road rage, about to crash their cars, and she just stops them. So it's more true to the Superman character, and it's really, really good. And it got me thinking about Man of Steel and how that movie is not true to the Superman character as he existed before, and also it's not a good movie. So I wanted to talk about that, but I'll let you guys go first.
Yeah. So I wanted to jump in right here, and so you just said portrayal of how Superman is supposed to be, and it reminded me of something I read on the internet the other day where I don't remember who, it doesn't really matter, some old hand around DC or whatever was saying regarding the Man of Steel movie and the new Batman versus Superman movie, was saying, I miss the old Superman character. And that bothered the hell out of me for two reasons. First of all, they're talking actually about a very specific slice of time in Superman history. Because if you look at old Superman comics, they're pretty generically just about like a guy who's really strong and can fly. And there's none of this super like epic morality stuff where he's put in all these extremely difficult ethical situations and has to maintain his superior morality while not killing people. I mean, in actuality, I would even say, I don't know this for a fact, but I would even venture to guess the majority of the early Superman stories are just weird, like one-offs where he gets into some conflict with Mxyzptlk and has to like outsmart him using some weird comical thing, or it goes to the Bizarro universe and it's just silly. So that's the first comment, is that there never was some platonic ideal of a Superman character. What happened is the Superman character evolved into this ideal of him being this basically his first superpower is super morality, and then everything else is sort of secondary. That was never the original idea, and that's an interesting idea, and I think that was worth talking about. But then, so the second reason why that quote bothers me is that if you miss the old Superman character, if you miss that character, go watch one of the 17 movies and 3,000 comic books that are about that character, but don't make it invalid to move on and make other stories about that character. So that's my vitriolic response to it.
That's fair. But then my question would be, why are you making a Superman movie? Because the thing about Superman is, and I agree that the idea of Superman has changed over the years. Obviously, everything changes. But Superman is a character that is basically perfect. He's an ideal to look up to, and he's a character that, like you talked about moral quandaries. I don't think Superman really has those, because he's supposed to be the person that everyone can count on. He's the guy. The cool thing about Superman is he's the guy that could destroy the world if he wanted to, but doesn't.
But that's so boring.
I agree, it's boring, but it's the real interesting thing to Superman with me is how he wrestles with the Clark Kent identity, which is something that this movie kind of completely ignored.
I think we're definitely watching these movies for different reasons, which might explain what
So I want to divide it into two different things, though. I want to say that as a Superman movie, this isn't a Superman movie. I mean, the things happen in this movie that the character of Superman would never do. Superman would never kill someone. Superman would never jump over a oil tanker that's sliding towards him and let it hit the building behind him, exploding and knocking the building over. He'd never throw someone into a building. He'd never take the battle back into the city.
I think the problem here is that this is actually like post Superman, which I will define immediately. So pre Superman is everything before Watchmen was a movie. And where in Watchmen, you basically have the idea incarnate of the super being that loses its touch with humanity and then like destroys everything and is used as it's basically taking Superman and playing it straight in a universe where he would actually be used by the government, right? Like that is Dr. Manhattan. And I sort of feel like Man of Steel is a direct response to that sort of usage of that character and being like, here is still Superman. He's still relevant, and we can actually kind of flesh out the tropes of the super tropey, kind of corny pre-Superman universe, but still have it work. And I feel like it does work because I like seeing the exploration of these tropes.
But I think that it's setting up an examination to talk about this superpowered guy that is going to be insignificant or not care about people and do these but it's setting that up for this next movie. That's the conflict in Batman vs Superman, is that Batman's pissed off at Superman because of what he did to the city. So it's just setting that up. But this movie, the structure of this movie is about him being a symbol of hope. It's the same thing we're talking about. We're just told that that's what he's supposed to be, but he never actually is that. And that's this movie is so caught up in itself, wanting to tell the traditional Superman story, but also wanting to have all the cool fight scenes where we, I think the quote was, we finally get to see Superman going all out on a person, when that's not what the character would ever do. He never goes full all out because he constantly has to worry about the situation around him.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree there that the whole point of having like an omnipotent character practically is that there's no enemy that they couldn't defeat if all holds were free. but
Well, so
what
do you still make
constrains him is morality. Sorry, again.
do you still make the same argument for like the Death of Superman comics where he actually has to go out all out versus Doomsday? Because like
And he does kill Doomsday.
yeah, and he does kill Doomsday. So is that not Superman, or is that I don't know. Why isn't your criticism symmetrical for the Death of Superman comic story?
I mean, are we talking about the Death of Superman? I could talk about the Death of Superman comic. I don't particularly like that comic. I don't think it's very good. A lot of people hold it up as one of the best examples of Superman. I don't really agree with that.
Yeah, I found that to be very boring, actually.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
But so what I want to get into, I want to get into this movie. I want to step back from the myth of Superman and talk about this movie, the character Superman that's constructed just in this film. And that's where I think the real problems lie here, because Clark Kent, Superman, doesn't have a character arc in this movie. He doesn't change. He doesn't do anything. So, but the movie sets it up as if he's supposed to. So the whole, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, the whole theme of this movie is free will versus determination outside of your control, making choices. The conflict between Zod and Superman is Zod was a guy who was bred and developed to do one thing, and he had no choice. He had to do that thing. Clark was a person who was outside of that and was therefore free to make his own decisions. Except Clark doesn't actually ever make a decision in this movie. He's Superman from the start. He's Superman when we see him in the flashbacks when he's saving people as an adult, even though he's still in hiding. The only real choice the movie sets up is he going to reveal himself to the world? And then the movie takes that choice away from him by having Zod reveal him to the world. And all he has to do is decide whether or not to come forward or not, or people will die. And that's not really a choice at all. Of course he's going to do that. He was always going to do that. So it makes it a movie about choice and then doesn't have any choices in it.
I mean, that's sort of dishonest because like there's like a large chunk of the movie is spent on like developing, basically just framing it like it's like the entire story with his dad, right? It's his dad doesn't want him to be Superman at all because
but he does.
Does he?
Yes. He wants both. His dad is a psychopath in this movie. Jonathan Kent makes no sense. His dad constantly tells him he's meant for great things and he's going to do great things, but then tells him at all costs not to save people.
Right, but so this is exactly the friction that we were talking about earlier about like the idea of Superman being terrifying. Like his dad is terrified of the idea of the invulnerable, immortal alien that can destroy the planet. But I mean, he's still his dad, so he's like, you're going to do great things.
His dad is terrified of what would happen to him. Well, he's worried about his son. He's worried about how the world would react to him, not the other way around.
Yeah, I think he's worried about both.
I think this all depends on how smart you think the movie is, and I think that may be one source of tension. Like, I don't even necessarily think the movie is as smart as I want it to be, but I'm allowed to make allowances, or I'm making allowances that it might be. So, like for example, Pa Kent, a certain amount of inconsistency is forgivable because he's almost the stand-in for the weak human who is morally highly uncertain. And I mean, it's just like, the speech where Clark asks him, he's like, well, should I have let them drown? And he says maybe, and he says maybe in sort of this very like angsty tone, and it's he's not saying yes, he's not saying no, he represents like what it is to be a normal human and to be full of to have a life full of ambiguity and uncertainty. So he may be a psychopath. I mean, that's an interesting reading. It's an interesting reading to think of him as actually being a bad person. I think maybe an equally valid reading is that he's just sort of paralyzed with indecision, because it's almost as though you were given like the nuclear briefcase or something, and someone's like, okay, you're in charge of this now, and you have no idea what to do, and like you're not prepared for this at all. And he wasn't prepared. He's just this farmer. He's not prepared to be raising this super weapon. and he has no idea what advice to give the boy because he doesn't even know how to live like an exemplary life. Because I mean, who does? So he's sort of like wafflingly giving him guidance, which is almost mostly based on his own fearful responses to what's happening. And then at the same time, he's sort of giving platitudes about how he's destined for greatness.
I think that's fair. I don't think the film that I saw is setting that up. I think we see Pa Kent in just flashbacks, and kind of the point of a flashback is to show the character learning something from his past, right? And every flashback that involves Jonathan is him simultaneously telling him two contradictory things, but then it's shot as if he's like the high moral standard that Clark is supposed to stand up to. And then that's trashed by his death, which is like stupid and serves no purpose. I mean, like it doesn't make, his character doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he did, I mean, according to Math's explanation, he's fairly internally consistent, right? Because he's like, he's literally willing to die to prevent Clark from basically showing off his powers and becoming known to the world, because he thinks of that as being so alien and terrifying and hard to not hard to understand, but like hard to conceptualize. Like he just can't handle it. Like it's,
so I think it's because he mistrusts humanity. Jonathan Kent does not trust people, and that's very interesting when you're making a movie about a guy who decides that he is going to take up the mantle of humanity and save the world. Which is my other big complaint with this movie is, why does Clark Kent want to save the world? And not just, and don't, and I'm asking you, it's not like, and don't just answer because it's the right thing to do. Because in order to set up empathy and to understand what the character's going through, you have to understand why the character would be motivated to do a certain thing. And the Clark Kent in this movie has never really lived in this world. He's always been an outsider to it. He placed himself in that position, either through his father's hiding or after his father's death, him just running away. He's never really impacted with humanity. We don't really see him, like, this is before he got the job, so we don't like see him with a group of buddies. Like, he's completely disconnected from people, and yet he's the guy that decides to risk it all to save mankind. So
instead of disagreeing with you, I have a question, and this isn't even meant as a snark. This is an honest response. Is there any Superman story that tells his story of coming to achieve his, what I call his moral superhero power, in a realistic way? Because I feel like that would be a very interesting and unique story that I've never actually seen. Even the old Superman movies, which I like, tend to just show, like, he grows up, they show a few scenes of him being sort of petty and using his superpowers to, like, throw a football really hard and run to beat a car. Like, none of it is particularly inspiring or makes you think that he's, you know, this great wise thinker. And then, you know, very suddenly, with no real segue, he is now Superman, and he has to be fighting villains and making all these very difficult choices. It's possible that I've just been underexposed to Superman stories, but I guess my point is, yeah, okay, I agree. This movie doesn't really sell you on how he comes to become someone who would willingly take on this mantle of his own free will. But then again, I've never seen any Superman story that does.
Well, I agree it's difficult to do. And I think part of the reason why this movie didn't do it is because this movie was terrified of telling the origin story. This is a weird origin story because it's like they wanted to do it, but they didn't, so they picked just flashbacks.
It's because he is the reluctant Superman, right? Like, the entire first part of the movie is about him basically just being a drifter and sort of reluctantly saving people and then, like, disappearing immediately, and like, that is the story, right? It's him struggling with his identity, and Like,
And on top of that, he has what you could almost call PTSD because he was basically made to be terrified of his own powers by his dad. I mean, I actually find that part of the story very understandable. Like if I had Superman's powers, and I had no physical needs and infinite strength or whatever, like wandering around, and then when you see something that needs to be fixed, you fix it, but you don't try to work it into some identity as a savior. That sounds understandable. It's the transition from that to being a savior that's less clear.
Well, if that's true, if that's the story of the film, don't you think that plotline is completely abandoned as soon as Zod shows up? I mean, as soon as he basically is forced to reveal himself, then that decision making is gone. He's just
right. His hand is forced,
but it's a movie it's a movie about choice. That's like it takes that choice away from him.
I mean, I agree, and that's why it's a tragedy that he has to kill Zod in the end, because he didn't want to have to deal with any of that. He probably would have been happy to just, I don't know, struggle with his identity longer, and then maybe come to a conclusion in a less stressful way.
So this guy isn't a good person, then? That's what we're saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
I agree. We never really saw any indication that he is a good person. I will agree with that, but I think
it's impossible for Superman, as he is a character, to be a good person by human standards, just because of like the implications of his powers. And to go to Metropolitan Man for a second. This is actually something this story does really well, which is it actually tries to think through the psychological torture that would be the life of Superman, where he literally can't actually save everyone all the time. Like any conscious stop, anytime he stops doing the job of Superman at any moment, people are dying and he could be saving them. So like, how do you even use a moral framework to talk about someone who like, in choosing to become Clark Kent as an alter ego, he's willingly several hours a day not saving the world? Like it's sort of a nonsensical character to start with, so it's very difficult to talk about goodness in the like abstract about this sort of thing.
There's another interesting aspect to that to that story where he's flying around saving people, basically being Superman, and then when Lex Luthor starts trying to kill him, basically by experimenting with various traps, Superman basically gets exposed to some particular trap at some point in the story, and he freaks out because he doesn't actually know whether he's vulnerable to this thing or not, because he's never encountered it before, and it's, I forget what it is exactly, but it's unique enough that you could actually sort of put yourself in his position and be like, oh, well, I don't actually know that I'm invulnerable to everything, and this was a very clever attack. And he basically just flies away and abandons the situation because the idea, like, it's never occurred to him that he could actually be harmed before. And that's interesting to me because, like, how can you be a moral superhero? How can you be you're not on the human spectrum of standards if you're not actually putting yourself at risk when you try to help people in the way Superman does. It's not like Iron Man, where Iron Man's just wearing a suit.
Yeah, I mean, these are all really cool points. I just don't think this movie is talking about these things at all. I don't think it's trying to. I think it's trying to actually tell a very traditional Superman story. It just doesn't know how to do it.
What sort of traditional Superman story does Superman destroy a city while fighting the villain? Like, I feel like it's fairly, like, it's almost directly referencing like the end of Watchmen with the fight at the end, where it's just everything is just completely destroyed, and it's just Superman standing there in the rubble of the city, and it's just like I think these are like explicitly the things that this movie is trying to talk about.
But I don't think I think if it's trying to do that, then it misses its mark because it doesn't ever stop to contemplate the reaction to that. That's all being pumped into the next movie. The movie never the moment the moment of calm after the ship's been sucked into the black hole, when he's sitting there in surrounded by rubble is the moment that he and Lois have their first kiss. It's completely like tonally insane because like he's literally standing probably in corpse dust and kissing a woman who he had no previous romantic chemistry with at all.
I think this is just agreeing with my point that this is not a traditional Superman movie.
I think it does, like, but it shows stuff like that, but then also like talks about Superman as the savior and has his two father figure characters in the movie constantly talking about how he's going to stand in front of them and lead them into the sun, and he's going to be the person that saves humanity and will be an image for them to follow. It can't make up its mind.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's so okay. Go ahead.
I mean, I would just like that's probably the comment that I can't get away from, because when I'm defending this movie, I'm sort of defending an interpretation of this movie. But if you make the point that it's tonally all over the place and even script wise seems to be talking out of both sides of its mouth, I can't disagree with that. I'm sort of saying I think they were trying to do too many different things, some of which were contradictory, and so I sort of just, I don't know, I don't want to say ignore, but I choose to focus on the aspects where I think they're trying to do something interesting, and just kind of say whatever for the other parts.
I mean, there is a textual friction between like what the superhuman, or what the Kryptonian, is that the name of the Superman race?
Yes.
Kryptonians. Like what they represent versus what Jor-El wants Superman to represent. Like from a kind of hilarious reading, Jor-El is kind of like a terrorist, and he's trying to get his son off of this planet so that he can go be like a hippie on his own little world. Whereas most of like the race of Kryptonians are, well, like most of them have just completely destroyed their planet and are all going to die.
Yeah. And
then there's like a splinter sect of like crazy fascists that want to reboot Kryptonians on another planet.
Now see, my favorite interpretation is that Zod is actually the good guy, because he knows his world is doomed and he's willing to do everything necessary to save his race. Tell me that's not an understandable motive.
But that it is, and the movie takes a second to try to explain that to you in the whole end, when he's like, everything I've done has been in the best interest of saving my people. And it's like, it's almost trying to paint him as a tragic villain because he didn't even have a choice. This was literally what he was bred to do. But then it has him, after that, Superman calling him a monster, and then him trying to laser people and get his neck stuck. Like, it tries to do both things. You can't paint him as both a monster and an understandable character.
I mean, this is sort of doing exactly the theme I want explored, which is taking the superhuman and psychologically torturing them until they break and seeing what happens. So like that is Zod's character, right? Like he is a tragic hero. He is a tragic villain. He is broken by Superman, and then just goes insane and destroys a city. Yeah, and that's exactly what could happen to Superman if he was psychologically tortured. And that is why this is terrifying.
Doesn't Superman basically like break the thing that is the storage mechanism of the whole Kryptonian race?
Yes.
At some point.
Yes.
So basically Superman kills a race in this movie.
Well, the race is already dead. It's unfertilized fetuses.
Well, as a transhumanist, I make no distinction there.
I mean, if we're talking like different moralities are sort of a central theme of this movie. So like, I think it is textually important that like an entire race is destroyed because Superman's dad told him to be good on Earth, and like.
Yeah, I mean, Superman's definition of good is very parochial. Like he doesn't, and that's sort of fine when you're telling like the type of story that ends with an American flag waving in the background, because sometimes we just want to hear a story where the bad guys are bad and the good guys are good, and the good guys are even honorable while they're beating the bad guys. I think there's, it's also a lot of fun, especially for people like me, to watch stories where the morality gets so complicated that the good guy destroys a race. And you're just sort of confused at the end because why would you be?
I'm with you on that. I just don't think that that's what the movie's trying to do. I think that you're looking at it and you're reading into stuff that I don't think the filmmakers of the movie were even really considering.
I
don't know.
I think there's plenty of textual evidence for this, and this is the whole death of the author thing again. But like, I am willing to grapple with authorial intent, and given the trailer for the next movie, they do like explicitly explore some of the same themes. So like, I don't think it's entirely insane to interpret things this way.
I am almost 100% convinced that the exploration of that theme is a result of the backlash of this movie, where people were furious that Superman would destroy a building with people in it.
No. So the end of the movie, it is not like that. Isn't it's like visually the same. It is like, go back and watch Watchmen, and like Dr. Manhattan reappears and there's like a giant crater in the ground and like everyone is dead. But it's like the same thing that happens, except it was actually Superman that did it and not Dr. Manhattan. So like,
yeah. And I mean, there's certain things toward the end, especially where they really do read better as black comedy than serious. I mean, just like the very last scene where he knocks this drone out of the sky, and like the general drives up, and he's like, "Why should we trust you?" And Superman's like, "Because I'm a boy from Kansas." And it's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And it's I mean.
Well, what he says is, "How do we know you have America's best interests at heart?" Is what he says, and that's why he says he's a boy from Kansas.
Right. So that's even better. That whole exchange is totally ridiculous because it's like, first of all, that's such a weird thing to ask him. It's like, I don't know.
The whole exchange is weird, and why, like, but again, in the context of that scene, they're portraying Superman as the good guy in that, and the general as the bad guy for spying on him, even with the little stupid joke at the end when the girl says, "I think he's kind of hot." Like, that whole scene, the tone of that scene, the way it's shot is constructed as Superman's your good guy, the government's bad for spying on him.
I think that's this...
and that's insane, because if you look at the scene just purely out of context, he fucking destroyed a piece of equipment just randomly and then threw it on the ground in front of a person that was driving along.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those like too many cooks in the kitchen thing, because I think that we could have a very interesting discussion all by itself about how Superman is shot in this movie. Like, and you just saw it, so you'll probably... I defer to your interpretations here, but
Jesus
like
everywhere.
So that's interesting. That's not what I was going to say. What I was going to say is, like, in that particular scene, and in a lot of similar scenes, you're getting angles that really emphasize this like weird cold alienness, where he's like flying. He's unnecessarily flying like 40 feet off the ground and looking down on them. And like you said, I mean, if this is the classic Superman character, would always, at least in the other movies and most comic books that I've seen, although there's not that many, he would like fly to the person, stand in front of them, and have a conversation.
Yeah,
this Superman flies above you and looks down on you like a Greek god, and the camera is either like over his shoulder looking down, emphasizing how puny the humans are, or looking up, emphasizing that he is a god. And things like that make me think like someone was behind this camera making these decisions about how he would be shot and what that would say. So this message is buried somewhere in the filmmaking process. I agree.
Well, that's fair. So that's Zack Snyder, and he's very visually talented. He knows how to construct shots. The action in this movie is actually good, even if it's ridiculous. I think that the issue with this movie is the disconnect between the narrative and what is shown on screen.
So, okay, then explain the scene where he is brought in handcuffs into like an interrogation room, and then he just stands up, breaking the handcuffs effortlessly, and then like has an argument with the government. Like this is all about the uncontrollable alien that has too much power to be trusted with. Like that is the theme of this movie. I can't.
I don't think so. I think that's one thing that's very briefly explored in scenes like that. But I think the thing they go over and over again is every time Superman's in a situation, it's choice, it's evolution. The one girl tells him that his weakness is his morals, where they don't have to bother with that because they've evolved beyond that point. It's him making the decisions, and that's the theme of the film. That's the thing that's most explored. We stay with Superman more than if you're gonna do a movie where Superman is the cold, scary alien, you need to focus more on the other characters, because you need to focus on the characters that actually see him that way. And
this is where I start maybe agreeing with the former one of your points, which is that you're no longer telling a Superman movie when you do the completely cold alien, right? Because like you do, the character of Superman still is this moral creature for whatever reason, maybe just because he grew up in Kansas with some, I don't know, like
that's what it's supposed to be.
Good Christians,
but
that is what this movie is, though, and that is where he gets his moral fiber, but that is challenged by these completely cold aliens that are ruthless and have evolved beyond morals, and there is a friction there, and the friction remains even after he kills them, because he is still invulnerable and could destroy the planet at any moment. So like,
yeah, I mean, it's funny how Russell Crowe's Jor-El is even like a megalomaniac, basically, because he's like, I'm going to send you to this world, and you're basically going to be like a god to them, and that's going to be pretty awesome.
Explicit quote.
Yeah, and I mean, think of how like he's basically saying like, I'm going to destroy this whole world's like balance of power and dynamic because I want my son to have a nice life. And I'm not bothered by this at all. In fact, I'm just like, my point being, Jor-El is just as like weird as the other Kryptonians. He's just weird in a direction that's slightly more palatable to us.
Yeah, but I think you watch the movie and you don't, and again, we're only seeing a computer program that's supposed to be him, so who knows what he was actually thinking. But I don't think he ever thought that Clark would rule the planet like with an iron grip and make everyone do what he wanted to. I think it was very clearly that there were people on this planet that had issues, and he could show them the way to be better, because he's awesome.
Yeah.
See, I like Metropolitan Man's way better, because it turns out that the Kryptonians are actually like a cross of eels and spiders, and it just happened that the little device crashed near some humans, and then they created Superman in the image of humans.
Yeah.
So that's my new textual interpretation of Man of Steel, is that everything you see is actually just a metaphor for a bunch of spider eels.
Yeah, that's been my interpretation ever since I read Metropolitan Man.
Wow.
It nicely gets around the problem of the Kryptonians looking just like humans.
Yes.
But that's not important. It doesn't matter.
True.
It doesn't matter what the aliens look like. The point is he can blend into humanity.
I mean, I think the DC universe is like entirely populated by humanoids anyway, just like Marvel and just like Star Trek and just like Star Wars. So,
yeah,
whatever.
Yeah. So I mean, we've just kind of gone back and forth here. I don't know if
fine.
anyone
We actually managed to disagree this time.
Yeah, I don't think we're leaving this coming to any deeper understanding on either side. I mean, I will say that I understand both your points. I just don't see what you're talking about in this film. I don't think if it was really trying to do the things that you guys think it was, I don't think it did a good job.
Oh, I just thought of something. Didn't Zack Snyder direct Watchmen?
He did.
Yes, he did.
So I can't believe I didn't remember that before now, but that, first of all, it makes me believe that there's no way that he made this movie without thinking about those things. But also just I see your perspective, Scott, because this movie was trying to do too many things at cross purposes, probably had too many cooks in the kitchen, and And if you want to, if you want this story, then just watch Watchmen. Don't watch this movie.
And that's not even really that great of a movie either.
I don't know.
Challenge.
I think it's probably overlong.
I think Watchmen's themes are better realized, but I just think it's a messy movie. I don't know. Snyder has a lot of problems with.
I mean, he also did Sucker Punch, so
Yeah.
he knows how to do subtext, and I think there is a lot of it in Man of Steel.
But Sucker Punch was a movie that wanted it both ways. It wanted his subtext to mean something, but then also he just wanted to see girls in skimpy schoolgirl outfits fight each other. Like it wants it both ways. It fetishizes that while also commenting on how bad it is to fetishize that. It's a very confused movie.
I mean, he does that every time. He did that in 300. There's definitely a tension between his visual mastery and his narrative lack of mastery.
I will say the problem with this movie is Snyder wanted to tell, and I think you're probably right, I think he wanted to tell the story that you guys are talking about, but DC needed him to set up a whole Superman universe. And he was forced to drop in the very traditional Superman tones, and that's why it's a movie that's tonally weird, that doesn't flow very well, and I just don't think it works.
I mean, if you read like the wiki page for the development, there were like many other directors attached to it before, and there was like even some like IP fight between ownership of the Superman franchise, like changing hands, and between like the previous movie and this one, and it's sort of a mess. So like I think I'm happy with what came out of that, because
Can we talk real quick about words like buzzwords like codex and world machines and stupid MacGuffins in blockbuster movies that cause conflict when the conflict exists on its own and you don't need these, we're fighting over this one object to have conflict. Like all blockbuster movies seem to do that these days.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest problem with these Avengers movies is this weird and like you said, there's no. It's a terrible, lazy source of tension, because you can always, no matter who your characters are or what your movie's about, you can always say like, oh no, it's that thing, we have to get it or it's going to blow up.
Right.
It's totally unrelated to the characters and their own conflicts, their own struggles.
And I think
inorganic.
Honestly, it's why, and I love the Marvel movies, but I think it's why the Marvel villains are usually very boring, because the Marvel villain is just, I need to get thing, and the good guys stopping them from getting thing. And then they have their own internal conflict, and the good guys are much more interesting. But it's lazy shorthand to force conflict and the crazy thing is in this film, the conflict could have existed already. Like there was another, I think was it Superman 2 or 3 that had Zod.
Yeah.
And there was no MacGuffin. There was just, there are Kryptonians on Earth, and there's conflict there already.
Yeah, and Zod wanted to take over the world. Very sort of straightforward. Like, basically, I mean, that was a cheesy, weird movie, but I think it had a much probably simpler and more straightforward approach, which was like Zod is what you're afraid Superman would turn into. He's Superman, except he does want to be a dictator.
He doesn't need this world engine, literally destroy the world thing, which, as I texted to you while I was watching this movie, makes no sense at all.
Yes.
I mean, it is just sort of representative as the like cold, unfeeling alien world destroying technology that could result from something of Superman's power, except in the wrong hands.
What's the world machine supposed to do again, exactly?
It terraforms to make it Kryptonian atmosphere, which would actually make them less powerful. It doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is actually one sort of hole. Like, why do they need to do that to make all of the Kryptonians again? Why can't they just do straight to the make a bunch of superhuman stuff?
Both Zod and Clark showed that they can live just fine in our atmosphere. They just take some time to adjust. And literally, I don't know. It's very quick, and there's a scene. It goes by really fast, and I think that's where they try to explain away. It was like, I think Zod says something like, "What do you want us to wait like 3 years for us to acclimate to the climate?" It's like,
Oh yeah, I remember.
it's like, well, it's not really that long a time. I mean,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
That is the one thing I cannot explain. But I will say that I'm not entirely bothered by MacGuffins and usage in movies so long as it's done cleverly. Like, because it's really just it's usage of tropes. Like, I am willing to forgive usage of tropes if it's done in a clever way. And like, for example, Pulp Fiction, there is the briefcase with the gold stuff in it that you never see what it is. This is like, it's sort of lampshading the use of MacGuffins in stories, and that actually makes it really well done.
But
then,
I mean, that's very true.
Then there's like, you have to get the Infinity Stones because they exist. Like that is the boring sort of MacGuffin, and I agree that that's tired, and we could do it without that.
And ultimately, I mean, yeah, I don't know. The MacGuffin in Pulp Fiction is less important than what the characters are all going through independently.
Right. It's actually not important at all. It's a character-driven story, and it's just a thing in the background that's kind of a nod to that idea.
It's so unimportant. We don't ever actually get to see what it is.
Yeah. Whereas I think all these other movies we're talking about, they become distorted and then spend inordinate amounts of time talking about the nature of the MacGuffin when it's just like, okay, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter. It
honestly makes me really worried about the next Avengers movie, which is finally going to be all of the Infinity Stones, whatever. I mean, I like the Marvel movies a lot. I think they're fun. They're not too complicated. But I just like... So what are they going to do with that? Like, they've made these stones to be so powerful that I feel like it's just going to be mindless blowing up of stuff. Kind of like the ending of this movie.
Yeah. I mean, it's... Go ahead.
Well, my understanding of the story that they're going to be trying to do is that the bad guy becomes basically omnipotent and is killed by betrayal or something. And
I mean, that's in the comics. The way Thanos always dies is because he is betrayed by people and he does really stupid things. He has like unlimited power, but makes really stupid decisions. But I know they're dividing it into two. And I'm pretty sure that at the end of the first half, like a bunch of the Avengers are either going to get killed or get like knocked out of the count. Cause I know like the main team of Avengers isn't going to be around.
Yeah. I mean, in order for them to stick with the storyline, I think a lot of them have to die.
I don't know if they'll go that far. I mean, I guess they can, because in comic universe, death is meaningless.
Right. I mean, if they kill them, then they're going to come back by the end of the same movie, or in the
I mean, there's even a handy stone for that you can use to go back in time or control time entirely.
Oh, how convenient!
Yeah. So let's just intentionally break our story on purpose, putting these elements in there.
Yeah, what was that thing in Harry Potter?
The Resurrection Stone?
No, the Time Turner one.
The Time Turner, yeah.
Yeah, that broke everything.
The plot breaker, yeah. I mean, Harry Potter is already pretty sinful in this regard because the magic is basically like whenever something needs to happen, they're like, oh, there's a spell for that.
Yeah.
And that's...
There's no real strict rules to it.
Yeah, and thus there's no overriding tension because you never know when you never know what's threatening. You never know what's actually going on because something could always just be like, oh well.
It's also a book for children though, so.
Well, see, okay, this isn't supposed to be a Harry Potter conversation, but I don't think the last couple of books were supposed to be for children.
Well, they were for the people that were children when the first ones came out. The books grew up with the people reading them.
Yes, I agree. I don't know if they grew up very successfully.
I didn't. Yeah. I've read the last book once. We've completely segued now, but I'm just going to go with it.
We're talking about bad use of tropes in fiction.
I reread the last book, or I haven't reread the last book. I didn't like that book at all, actually.
I thought it was pretty slow
and it introduced 3 new MacGuffins that completely changed everything.
Yeah,
it was also. I mean, it was basically the last 2 books were that way, where they just kind of wandered around in the woods looking for Deathly Hallows or whatever,
Yeah.
looking for Horcruxes rather, and it just kind of goes nowhere, and it doesn't have the charm of being in the Magic Castle with all of its secrets.
It's the damn Stephen King syndrome that once you get so big, you don't have an editor anymore.
Yeah.
You can tell it just by looking at the book sizes on your bookshelf.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
She stopped being edited.
Yeah. And I think she lost track of where the charm of her stories actually was, and started thinking like, well, I need to tell the story of Snape.
Yeah,
This is
it
very
definitely
important.
stops being the boarding school adventure story.
Yeah. Right.
By, I don't know, maybe the fourth or fifth, I'm not sure.
Right. And that was the formula that made it all work. So
Yeah. Okay, that's a complete tangent. But since we've stopped talking about Man of Steel, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Next week, we are going to be talking about Star Wars, because that movie's coming out a week from... Wait, is it? No, I think I'm off. What day is it?
I don't know.
Is it that soon? God, what day is it?
It's the 7th.
It's the 7th.
I think it is that soon.
See, I
Yeah, not this Friday, but next Friday is Star Wars. So next
Wow.
week's podcast will be talking about the previous Star Wars, which, Matt, in my opinion, we're going to pretend like the prequels don't exist.
I don't know what prequels.
There we go.
Do you want me to play devil's advocate for the prequels?
No, we actually... that would... No,
impossible.
you realize when you're playing devil's advocate, you're advocating for the devil. I think we're going to have James Gentry on to talk some Star Wars. Focus on the original trilogy, which I don't know how I'm going to watch those things, because I don't have them on Blu-ray because I refuse to buy them with
Ditto.
all the new changes.
Yeah, I looked at them in the store recently and saw that they were the incorrect version and didn't buy them.
Did you see that they came out with like all these new Steelbook versions that actually look really nice? And I
Yeah.
want them, but I won't. Maybe I'll buy the Steelbook and then sub it out for the correct version if they ever release it. Do you think Disney's gonna do that? Like release original versions, like restored original versions?
I do.
I hope-
I think there's a greater
I thought they
than
were
50%
going to.
chance,
They have not announced that officially.
because really this is all about George Lucas's horrible relationship with his ex-wife. I mean, seriously, he's trying to deny her royalties or something complicated like
Oh,
that.
really?
Yeah. So now that it's out of his hands,
You would think there's too much money in that. I mean, everyone that's our age or older would buy those, I think.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I haven't bought I haven't bought any original series movies ever. The last version that we owned was the VHS.
Yeah, that's same.
Yeah, and those are some of my favorite movies. So that's how irrational I am about this.
So, I guess I know they're on like iTunes and stuff, but again, that would be paying money for a version. I don't know. Maybe I'm just gonna go with the fact that I've seen them 100 times and don't need to rewatch them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could just act them out.
Yeah, we could just
together
that could be the podcast. We just go through each scene. All right, but that's what we got planned for next week. So look forward to that. Daniel, where can we reach you on the internet?
You can find me at BrickleyScienceReview.com, because I am the blog editor for the Brickley Science Review.
Awesome. We will put a link to that in the show notes. Matt, how about you? What's your long, confusing Twitter name?
I'm on Twitter at MORIDINAMAEL, which will be in the show notes.
And I am also on Twitter, at ScottDaly85. That's DALY. Our website Twitter is at Daily Planet Films. And all of our writing can be found at www.dailyplanetfilms.com. If you could please favorite, subscribe to this podcast, share it with friends, do everything you need to do. That'd be great. But thank you guys for stopping by. Thanks for the conversation, guys, even though you're both still clearly wrong and I get the last word. So have a good week.